In Nashville, Tennessee, 80-year-old Margaret Rose Henderson struggles to make ends meet on her fixed income while caring for her sick grandson, Tommy. When her debit card is declined at the local grocery store during a busy afternoon, she faces the humiliation of having to put back essential items. That's when country music legend Dolly Parton, shopping quietly in the same store, steps forward with an unexpected act of kindness that changes everything. What begins as a simple gesture of paying for groceries evolves into a deeper story about community, dignity, and how one moment of compassion can ripple through multiple lives, transforming not just Margaret's world, but touching everyone involved. From the young cashier struggling with her own dreams, to the store manager facing corporate pressure, to Dolly herself, who discovers that sometimes giving back means more than any spotlight ever could. The autumn air in Nashville carried that familiar crispness that reminded Margaret Rose Henderson of better times. At 80 years old, she had learned to find beauty in the small things, the way golden leaves danced outside her kitchen window, the smell of coffee brewing in her modest apartment on the east side of town, and the sound of her 12-year-old grandson Tommy's laughter echoing down the hallway when he was having a good day. Today wasn't one of those good days. Margaret stood at her kitchen table, carefully counting out the crumpled bills from her worn leather purse. $23.47. That's all that remained until her Social Security check arrived in 5 days. She'd already made the calculations 3 times, hoping somehow the numbers would change, but mathematics had never been kind to hope. Grandma rose. Tommy's voice drifted from the living room, hoarse from the persistent cough that had been plaguing him for weeks. The doctor had prescribed medication, but even with Medicare, the copay had eaten into their grocery money. "Are we going to the store today?" Margaret's heart clenched. She'd promised him they'd pick up ingredients for his favorite chicken soup, the one recipe her mother had passed down through generations. It was one of the few things that still brought him comfort since his parents had died in that car accident 18 months ago, leaving him in her care. "Yes, sweetheart," she called back, forcing brightness into her voice. "Just let me get my coat." She looked down at her list: chicken broth, carrots, celery, noodles, and medicine for Tommy's cough if there was money left over. The medicine alone would cost $15. She folded the list carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket alongside her debit card, which showed a balance she already knew by heart, $28.12 in her checking account. The walk to Peterson's Market took 15 minutes, past houses that had seen better days and dreams that had grown weathered with time. Margaret had been making this same walk for 12 years, ever since she'd moved to this neighborhood to be closer to Tommy's family. Back then, she'd never imagined she'd be the one raising him. Peterson's Market wasn't the fanciest grocery store in Nashville, but it was honest and clean, with friendly employees who knew their regular customers by name. The owner, Robert Peterson, had taken over from his father and maintained the same community spirit that had kept the store running for 43 years. Margaret grabbed a small cart and began her careful navigation through the aisles. Every item went through a mental calculation. The store brand chicken broth was 30 cents cheaper than the name brand. The carrots looked fresh but cost more than she'd hoped. She found herself putting back the bag of egg noodles twice, trying to decide if the generic brand would taste different enough for Tommy to notice. "Mrs. Henderson!" She turned to see Sarah Mitchell, a young woman in her mid-20s wearing the green Peterson's Market apron. Sarah had been working at the store for 2 years while pursuing her nursing degree at Nashville Community College. Her warm brown eyes always held a genuine kindness that reminded Margaret of her younger self. "Hello, dear. How are your studies going?" Sarah's face lit up. "Really well. Thank you for asking. I've got my clinical rotations starting next month at Vanderbilt Medical Center. I'm nervous but excited." She paused, noticing Margaret's sparse cart. "Finding everything okay today?" "Oh, yes. Just picking up a few things for Tommy. He's been under the weather. I'm sorry to hear that. Please tell him I said hello. He's such a sweet kid." Sarah's expression grew concerned. "How is he doing overall? I know it's been challenging." Margaret appreciated Sarah's tactful way of acknowledging their situation without making her feel pitied. "He has his good days and his difficult ones. We're managing." It was the same response she gave everyone who asked, a polite way of saying that some nights she lay awake wondering how she was going to make everything work, how she was going to be enough for a boy who had already lost so much. After Sarah moved on to help other customers, Margaret continued her careful shopping. She picked up the medicine for Tommy, watching her mental tally climb. The chicken broth, carrots, and celery brought her to $22.68. She still needed something for dinner tonight. In the bread aisle, she found a marked-down loaf that would be perfect for grilled cheese sandwiches. As she reached for it, another hand touched the same loaf. She looked up to see a woman with platinum blonde hair styled in an elegant but approachable way, wearing a simple but well-tailored coat and sunglasses pushed up on her head. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman said with a warm smile and a distinctly southern accent. "Please go ahead." "Thank you, dear." Margaret smiled back, struck by something familiar about the woman's voice, though she couldn't quite place it. "Are you from around here?" "I am now," the woman replied with a gentle laugh. "Nashville's been home for more years than I care to count. I love this little store. It reminds me of the places I shopped growing up in East Tennessee." They chatted briefly about the changing neighborhood and the charm of family-owned businesses before going their separate ways. Margaret finished her shopping and headed toward the checkout, her cart containing exactly what she could afford: the medicine, soup ingredients, and the marked-down bread. The late afternoon sun streamed through Peterson's large front windows as Margaret approached checkout lane 3, where Sarah was working. Behind her in line, she noticed the friendly blonde woman from the bread aisle, her cart filled with what looked like ingredients for a family gathering: multiple bags of groceries, flowers, and what appeared to be supplies for baking. "Did you find everything you needed today, Mrs. Henderson?" Sarah asked as she began scanning items. "I did. Thank you." Margaret watched the digital display climb: $4.89 for the medicine, $2.67 for the broth, $1.89 for the carrots, $1.23 for the celery, $0.89 for the bread. The total came to $11.57. She felt a small surge of relief. She'd managed to stay under budget and would have enough left over for a few other necessities later in the week. Margaret inserted her debit card and waited for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, the machine displayed a message that made her heart sink. "Card declined." "Let me try that again," Sarah said kindly, her voice gentle as she ran the card through once more. Again, "Card declined." Margaret's cheeks flushed warm with embarrassment. She knew she had $28 in her account, but perhaps a pending transaction she'd forgotten about had caused an overdraft fee, pushing her below the needed amount. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I had enough. Let me put back a few things." She reached for the medicine first. It was the most expensive item, but her hands were trembling slightly. The embarrassment of having her card declined in front of other customers was overwhelming. She'd been in this situation before, and each time felt like a small piece of her dignity was being chipped away. "Mrs. Henderson, please don't worry about it," Sarah said softly. "Why don't we try calling the bank? Sometimes there are holds that—" "Excuse me." Both Margaret and Sarah turned to see the blonde woman from earlier stepping forward. Up close, Margaret could see the genuine concern in her clear blue eyes and the determined set of her jaw. "I couldn't help but notice what happened," the woman said, her voice warm but decisive. "Would you allow me to take care of this for you?" Margaret's eyes widened. "Oh no, dear, I couldn't possibly." "Please," the woman interrupted gently. "It would be my honor. I've been where you are, and I know how hard it can be to ask for help. You're not asking, I'm offering." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, but Margaret still shook her head. "That's very kind, but I can just put back a few items. Really, it's no trouble." The woman stepped closer, her presence radiating a kind of warmth that seemed to envelop the small checkout area. "What's your name?" "Margaret. Margaret Henderson." "Well, Margaret Henderson, I'm Dolly. And I can see in your eyes that you're taking care of someone who needs you. I'm guessing it's not just yourself you're shopping for today." Margaret's throat tightened. Something about this woman's gentle directness made it impossible to maintain her usual walls. "My grandson. He's been sick and I just wanted to make him some soup. His favorite soup." Dolly's expression softened even further. "Then we absolutely cannot let that boy go without his favorite soup." "Sarah, honey," she said, turning to the cashier, "would you please ring up Mrs. Henderson's groceries again? I'll be taking care of everything." Sarah's eyes had grown wide with recognition, though she maintained her professional composure. "Of course, miss. Of course." "Wait," Margaret said, finally processing something that had been nagging at her. The voice, the warmth, the way this woman carried herself. Oh my goodness, you're Dolly Parton. Dolly smiled, that famous megawatt smile that had graced countless album covers and movie screens. Guilty as charged, but today I'm just a neighbor helping another neighbor. That's all. The small crowd that had gathered behind them in line began to murmur with excitement and recognition, but Dolly's attention remained focused entirely on Margaret. She handed her credit card to Sarah without taking her eyes off the older woman. "I can't let you do this," Margaret whispered, tears beginning to form. "It's too much." "Sweetheart," Dolly said, reaching out to gently touch Margaret's arm. "Kindness is never too much. Besides, I have a feeling you've spent most of your life taking care of others. Let someone take care of you for just a moment." The transaction went through smoothly, and Sarah carefully bagged the groceries with extra attention. Other customers had started pulling out their phones, but Dolly seemed completely unbothered by the attention. Her focus remained on Margaret, who was struggling to process what had just happened. "Miss Parton," Margaret managed, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Dolly replied. "Just hug that grandson of yours extra tight tonight and tell him his soup is made with a little extra love today. That's all the thanks I need." As Margaret gathered her bags, her hands no longer trembling, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the lightness that comes from knowing someone cares. Not someone who was obligated to care, like family, but a stranger who chose to care simply because she could. "Wait," Margaret said as Dolly began to turn away. If there's ever anything I can do." Dolly paused and smiled. "Just keep being the kind of grandmother who walks to the store to make soup for a sick little boy. The world needs more people like you, Margaret Henderson." As Margaret walked home, her bags feeling somehow lighter despite being full, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The same autumn air that had felt heavy with worry that morning now seemed to carry possibility. Tommy would have his soup, made with ingredients paid for by one of the kindest hearts she'd ever encountered. But more than that, she'd been reminded of something she'd almost forgotten, that sometimes, when the world feels too heavy to carry alone, there are still people willing to help shoulder the load. And sometimes, those people come in the most unexpected packages, like a country music superstar doing her own grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon in Nashville. Behind her, Peterson's Market buzzed with excited conversations about what customers had just witnessed, but Margaret was already planning how she'd tell Tommy about the day a famous singer made sure he could have his favorite soup. She knew he wouldn't believe her at first, but the soup would be proof enough. Some stories, she thought, are too good not to be true. The story might have ended there, with Margaret making her soup and Dolly continuing her own shopping as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But kindness, especially public kindness, has a way of creating ripples that extend far beyond the initial act. Sarah Mitchell stood behind her register long after Margaret and Dolly had left, processing what she'd just witnessed. In her 2 years at Peterson's Market, she'd seen plenty of declined cards and embarrassed customers. Usually people would put back items or leave quietly, their dignity bruised but intact. She'd never seen someone step in so gracefully, so completely, to help a stranger. Sarah, she looked up to see her manager, David Kowalski, approaching the register. David was 38 years old, had been with Peterson's for 8 years, and was generally well liked by the staff. But lately, he'd been under pressure from the corporate office to increase sales metrics and reduce what they called customer service time. Essentially, to move people through the lines faster and with less personal interaction. "Was that really Dolly Parton?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and concern. Yes, it was. Sarah continued processing the next customer's items, but her mind was still on what she'd witnessed. She paid for Mrs. Henderson's groceries. "Mrs. Henderson is one of our regulars. She's raising her grandson after his parents died. She comes in every week and always counts her money carefully." David nodded absently. He knew Mrs. Henderson by sight, had seen her careful shopping habits, and watched her interactions with the staff. She was exactly the kind of customer Peterson's Market prided itself on serving, a neighborhood regular who had been coming to the store for years. "Did anyone get video?" David asked. Sarah looked at him sharply. "I hope not. It wasn't a publicity stunt, Mr. Kowalski. Miss Parton was just being kind." But even as she said it, Sarah could see other customers still talking animatedly, and she caught sight of at least 2 people who had their phones out during the interaction. In today's world, moments like these rarely stayed private for long. 3 aisles away, Jennifer Walsh was selecting items for her own family's dinner. At 32, Jennifer worked as a social media coordinator for a local marketing firm and had an instinct for recognizing moments that would resonate with people. She had indeed captured part of the interaction on her phone, though she'd been careful to film discreetly and focus more on the act of kindness than on the people involved. Jennifer had moved to Nashville 2 years ago with her husband Mark and their 6-year-old daughter Emma. They'd come from Chicago, drawn by Mark's job opportunity and the promise of a slower pace of life. Jennifer had quickly fallen in love with the sense of community she found in their East Nashville neighborhood, and Peterson's Market had become a weekly tradition for their family. She'd recognized Dolly immediately. It was hard not to, even with the understated appearance. But what struck her wasn't the celebrity presence. It was the genuine emotion she'd witnessed. The embarrassment on the elderly woman's face, the gentle insistence from Dolly, and the way the interaction had transformed what could have been a humiliating moment into something beautiful. Jennifer found herself thinking about her own grandmother, who had passed away 3 years earlier. Grandma Helen had been proud and independent until the very end, often refusing help even when she needed it. Jennifer remembered the frustration of trying to care for someone who valued her dignity more than her comfort, and she could see that same dignity in the way the elderly woman, Margaret, Dolly had called her, had initially refused the help. By the time Jennifer finished her own shopping, she'd made a decision. She would share the video, but she'd do it thoughtfully. She would focus on the act of kindness rather than the celebrity angle, and she'd be careful not to exploit Margaret's vulnerable moment. That evening, after Emma was asleep and Mark was watching the news, Jennifer sat at her kitchen table with her laptop. She uploaded the brief video clip and crafted a careful post. Today, at our local grocery store, I witnessed something that restored my faith in human kindness. An elderly woman's card was declined as she tried to buy medicine and soup ingredients for her sick grandson. Without hesitation, another customer stepped forward and paid for everything. It wasn't about recognition or publicity. It was simply one person helping another in a moment of need. This is what community looks like. This is Nashville. Kindness matters. Community love. Nashville. She hesitated for a moment, then added the video and hit post on her personal Facebook page, which had about 800 followers, mostly friends, family, and co-workers. Jennifer had no way of knowing that among her followers was Marcus Thompson, a freelance journalist who contributed to several Nashville publications. Marcus had been looking for positive local stories to counter the stream of negative news that seemed to dominate the headlines. When he saw Jennifer's post at 10:47 p.m. that night, he immediately recognized its potential. More importantly, he recognized Dolly Parton. Marcus had grown up in Nashville and had been following Dolly's career and philanthropy for decades. He knew this wasn't out of character for her. She'd been quietly helping people throughout her career. But the spontaneous nature of the grocery store encounter and the authentic emotion captured in the video made it special. He reached out to Jennifer through Facebook Messenger. "Hi, Jennifer. I'm a local journalist, and I saw your post about the Kind Act at Peterson's Market. Would you be willing to talk to me about what you witnessed? I think this is exactly the kind of story Nashville needs to hear right now." Meanwhile, across town, Margaret was ladling homemade chicken soup into a bowl for Tommy. The apartment smelled wonderful, like comfort and love, and the kind of warmth that can only come from food made with care. "This tastes different, Grandma Rose," Tommy said after his first spoonful. "Better?" Margaret smiled, remembering Dolly's words about the soup being made with extra love. "I had a little help with the ingredients today." "What kind of help?" Margaret sat down across from her grandson, studying his face. The fever had broken that afternoon, and some color was returning to his cheeks. At 12, he was still young enough to believe in the goodness of strangers, but old enough to understand the value of money and the weight of their circumstances. "Well," she began, "my card wouldn't work at the store today. I was going to put some things back, but a very kind lady offered to pay for our groceries." Tommy's eyes widened. "A stranger paid for our food?" "She did. She said she'd been where we are and wanted to help." "Was she rich?" Margaret considered this. "I think she was comfortable, yes." But more than that, she was kind. Really, truly kind. She decided not to tell Tommy about Dolly's identity just yet. The kindness was more important than the celebrity, and she wanted him to focus on the lesson rather than the fame. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed with a full stomach and his cough finally quieting, Margaret sat in her small living room and thought about the day's events. She'd lived through the Great Depression as a child, had raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband died young, and had faced more hardships than blessings in her 80 years. She'd learned to expect little and appreciate much. But today had reminded her that unexpected blessings could still arrive, often when they were needed most. More than the groceries themselves, Dolly's kindness had given her something precious. Hope. Hope that people still looked out for each other. Hope that Tommy would grow up in a world where strangers could be angels. Hope that tomorrow might be a little easier than today. She had no idea that at that very moment, Jennifer's Facebook post was being shared by friends and friends of friends. She had no idea that Marcus Thompson was already drafting a story proposal to send to his editors at the Nashville scene. She had no idea that by morning, her simple trip to the grocery store would be the subject of conversations across the city. Margaret Henderson went to sleep that night grateful for soup ingredients and a grandson whose cough was finally improving. She woke up to a world that had learned her name. At 6:30 a.m. the next morning, Margaret's phone rang. She almost never received calls this early, and her first thought was worry about Tommy. But when she answered, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar and professional. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Rebecca Martinez from News Channel 4. I hope I'm not calling too early, but I wanted to reach out about what happened at Peterson's Market yesterday. We'd love to talk to you about your experience." Margaret sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. "I'm sorry, how did you get my number?" "We reached out to the store and they provided your contact information from your loyalty card account. We're hoping you might be willing to share your story." "My story?" "About Dolly Parton paying for your groceries. It's a beautiful example of kindness in our community, and we think our viewers would love to hear about it." Margaret's mind raced. She thought about Tommy, still sleeping peacefully down the hall. She thought about her quiet life, her careful routines, her desire to simply care for her grandson without drawing attention to their struggles. "I appreciate your interest," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that." It was a private moment of kindness. "Of course, we completely understand," Rebecca replied smoothly. "But stories like this give people hope. In a world full of difficult news, this is the kind of positive story that reminds people of the good in humanity. You don't have to make a decision right now. Just think about it. Can I give you my number in case you change your mind?" After hanging up, Margaret sat in her quiet kitchen and realized that her world had shifted again, just as dramatically as it had in that grocery store checkout line. The difference was that yesterday's shift had felt like a blessing. This one felt more complicated. She was about to discover just how complicated things could get when kindness meets modern media. By Thursday morning, Jennifer Walsh's Facebook post had been shared 847 times. Marcus Thompson's article in the Nashville scene titled "Dolly's Grocery Store Grace, When Kindness Shows Up in Aisle 3" had been picked up by the Associated Press. Local news stations across Tennessee were running the story, and social media was buzzing with hashtags like "Our Dolly Kindness" and "Nashville Neighbors." Margaret Henderson discovered this when she stepped outside to get her mail and found a news van parked across the street from her apartment building. "Mrs. Henderson," a young man with perfectly styled hair and a microphone jogged toward her. "I'm Chad Williams from Channel 5 News. Do you have a moment to talk about your experience with Dolly Parton?" Margaret clutched her mail to her chest and hurried back toward her building. "I'm sorry. I can't. I need to get inside." Just a quick comment about how it felt to receive such generosity? But Margaret was already through the door, her heart racing. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment with legs that felt suddenly unsteady. This wasn't what she'd wanted. The kindness had been pure and private, and now it felt like it was being turned into something else entirely. Tommy was eating breakfast when she walked in, looking concerned. "Grandma Rose, there are people with cameras outside. Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. Remember I told you about the kind lady who helped us at the store? Well, people found out about it and they want to talk about what happened." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Are we famous?" Margaret sat down beside him, trying to find the right words. The lady who helped us is famous. Her name is Dolly Parton. She's a singer. People are interested in the story because she's well known. Dolly Parton? Like the real Dolly Parton? The one who sings Jolene? Tommy's 12-year-old mind was struggling to process this information. She bought our soup? She did. That's so cool. Can we call the news people back? I want to tell them about the soup. Margaret felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. Tommy, I know it seems exciting, but I think we should keep this private. The important thing isn't that she's famous, it's that she was kind. But even as she said it, Margaret could see that the decision might not entirely be theirs to make. Across town at Peterson's Market, David Kowalski was dealing with his own media attention. The store's phone had been ringing non-stop since 7 a.m. with requests for interviews and information. He'd already spoken to 3 reporters and was beginning to realize that this unexpected attention could be either a blessing or a curse for the family-owned business. Mr. Kowalski? Sarah Mitchell approached his office, looking uncomfortable. There's a reporter from the Tennessean here. She wants to interview me about what I saw. David looked up from his desk, which was covered with message slips from various media outlets. How do you feel about that, Sarah? Honestly, I'm torn. On one hand, it was a beautiful moment and Miss Parton was genuinely wonderful. On the other hand, Mrs. Henderson seemed like a very private person, and I'm worried about how all this attention might affect her. This was exactly what David had been thinking about all morning. Peterson's Market had built its reputation on treating customers like family, on respecting their privacy and dignity. The last thing he wanted was for their regular customers to feel exposed or exploited. Here's what I think, David said. If you want to talk to reporters, you can. But let's keep the focus on the kindness itself, not on the specific people involved. We can talk about what it means to see community support in action without getting into personal details about Mrs. Henderson's situation. Sarah nodded gratefully. That feels right. Should I mention that this kind of thing isn't unusual here? I mean, not with celebrities, but customers helping each other out. That's a great point. This was special because of who was involved, but the spirit of it, neighbors helping neighbors, that happens here all the time. What neither David nor Sarah knew was that their conversation was being overheard by Emma Rodriguez, a reporter from the Tennessean who had arrived early and was waiting in the customer service area. Emma was 34 years old, had been covering Nashville news for 6 years, and had developed a reputation for thoughtful, nuanced reporting on community stories. Emma had grown up in a small town in Texas where everyone knew everyone else's business, and she understood the delicate balance between sharing inspiring stories and protecting people's privacy. As she listened to David and Sarah's conversation, she found herself more interested in the broader story than the specific details. When Sarah agreed to the interview, Emma made sure to ask questions that focused on the atmosphere of the store, the sense of community among the customers, and the way acts of kindness seemed to ripple outward. She carefully avoided pressing for details about Margaret's personal circumstances or financial situation. What struck me most, Sarah told Emma, was how natural it all seemed. Miss Parton didn't make a big show of it. She just saw someone who needed help and helped. And Mrs. Henderson, she's one of our favorite customers, always polite, always grateful. It felt like watching family take care of family. Does this kind of thing happen often here? Customers helping each other? Sarah smiled. More than you might think. Maybe not in such a dramatic way, but yes. Just last month, a customer whose EBT card wasn't working for hot food items found that someone had paid for his rotisserie chicken after he left it at the counter. People leave their change for the next person who might be short. During the ice storm last winter, customers were buying supplies for elderly neighbors who couldn't get to the store. Emma's article, which would run the next day, would focus on this aspect of the story. The way Peterson's Market had become a kind of community hub where people looked out for each other, and how Dolly's gesture was extraordinary, not just because of who she was, but because it exemplified the best of what small communities could be. But that was still 24 hours away. In the present moment, the story was spinning in directions no one had anticipated. At 2:15 p.m., Margaret's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a Nashville area code she didn't recognize. Mrs. Henderson, this is Janet Sullivan. I'm calling on behalf of Miss Dolly Parton. Margaret's hands went cold. Is something wrong? Did I do something wrong? "Oh, no, honey, not at all." Janet's voice was warm and reassuring. "Miss Parton asked me to call because she's been made aware of all the media attention, and she wanted to make sure you're comfortable with how things are being handled. She's concerned about your privacy." Margaret sank into her kitchen chair. "I don't know what to do. I never expected this. People are calling and wanting to interview me, and there are reporters outside my building. I understand completely. Miss Parton has dealt with unwanted media attention her whole career, and she knows how overwhelming it can be. She wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet with her, somewhere private, to talk about how to handle this situation." She wants to meet with me again? "She does. She feels responsible for the attention you're receiving, and she'd like to help you navigate it. Would you be open to that?" Margaret looked down the hallway toward Tommy's room, where she could hear him on a video call with his friend, excitedly telling the story of how Dolly Parton bought their groceries. The joy in his voice was unmistakable, but so was the potential for disappointment if this all went wrong. "Yes," Margaret said quietly. "I think I'd like that." Janet arranged for a car to pick up Margaret and Tommy at 4 p.m. and bring them to Dolly's office in the Gulch, away from the reporters who were still lingering around her apartment building. As Margaret hung up the phone, she realized she was about to enter a world she'd never imagined being part of. She also realized that the simple act of grocery shopping would never feel quite the same again. At exactly 4 p.m., a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the back entrance of Margaret's building. The driver, a kind-faced man named Robert who worked for Dolly's management company, helped Margaret and Tommy into the car and drove them through Nashville's afternoon traffic toward downtown. Tommy pressed his face to the window, taking in the city sights with excitement. "Grandma Rose, are we really going to meet Dolly Parton? Like at her actual office?" "We are," Margaret replied, still trying to process the surreal nature of her day. "But Tommy, I need you to remember that she's just a person, like us. She happens to be famous, but that doesn't make her different from anyone else when it comes to treating her with respect." "I know," Tommy said solemnly. "But can I tell her that Jolene is my favorite song?" Margaret smiled. "I think she'd like that." 20 minutes later, they were being escorted through the elegant but welcoming offices of Dolly Parton Enterprises. The walls were lined with gold records, photographs from decades of performances, and images of various charitable endeavors. But what struck Margaret most was how warm and inviting the space felt, more like a family business than a celebrity empire. Dolly met them in a comfortable conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Nashville skyline. She was dressed simply in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair styled more casually than her public appearances. When she saw Tommy, her face lit up with genuine delight. "Well, hello there, young man. You must be the grandson I've been hearing about. How are you feeling?" Tommy suddenly became shy, standing half behind Margaret. "I'm better. The soup worked. Thank you for buying our groceries." Dolly knelt down to his level. "You're very welcome, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're feeling better. Your grandma tells me you like Jolene." Tommy nodded eagerly, his shyness evaporating. "It's my favorite song. My mom used to play it when she was cooking dinner." Something flickered across Dolly's face, a recognition of loss and the way music can keep memories alive. "That's wonderful, honey. Music has a way of keeping the people we love close to us, doesn't it?" She looked up at Margaret, who was watching the interaction with tears in her eyes. "Would you like to sit down? We have a lot to talk about." Once they were settled around the conference table, with Tommy happily examining a guitar that Dolly had invited him to look at, Dolly addressed the situation directly. "Margaret, I am so sorry about all the attention this has brought to your life. When I helped you at the store yesterday, I never imagined it would turn into such a big story. I should have been more mindful of the possibility." Margaret shook her head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were kind to us when we needed it most. It's not your fault that people want to make it into something bigger. Even so, I feel responsible. I've been dealing with media attention my whole career, but I chose this life. You didn't, and neither did Tommy." She glanced at the boy, who was carefully strumming the guitar. "I want to help you handle this in whatever way feels right to you." "I don't even know what that means," Margaret admitted. "I've never been in a situation like this. This morning there were reporters outside my apartment building. People are calling me. I don't understand why everyone cares so much about what happened." Dolly leaned back in her chair, considering her words. People are hungry for good news, Margaret. We live in a world where every day seems to bring more bad news, more division, more reasons to lose faith in each other. When something genuinely good happens, when people see real kindness in action, they hold on to it like a life preserver. She gestured toward the window, where the Nashville skyline stretched out in the afternoon light. But here's the thing. This story isn't really about me. It's about you. It's about a grandmother who walks to the store to buy soup ingredients for her sick grandson, even when money is tight. It's about the kind of love that doesn't give up, even when things get hard. People see that, and it reminds them of what's important. Margaret felt a lump forming in her throat. I'm just doing what any grandmother would do. That's exactly what makes it so powerful, Dolly replied gently. You don't see yourself as extraordinary, but love like yours, sacrificial, persistent, unconditional. That's the most extraordinary thing in the world. Tommy looked up from the guitar. Grandma rose. Are you crying? Margaret wiped at her eyes, embarrassed. Happy tears, sweetheart. Dolly reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. Here's what I'm thinking. We have a few options for how to handle this. We can ask my publicist to put out a statement asking the media to respect your privacy, and hopefully they'll back off. Or, if you're comfortable with it, we could do one thoughtful interview together, something that tells the story the way it actually happened and focuses on the right things. That might satisfy people's curiosity and then let you get back to your normal life. What would you recommend? Honestly, I think one good interview might be the way to go. If we don't tell the story ourselves, other people will keep telling their version of it. And their versions might not be as respectful of you and Tommy as I'd want them to be. Margaret looked at her grandson, who had started playing a simple melody on the guitar, something that sounded vaguely familiar. Tommy, what do you think? Would you be okay with talking to a reporter if Miss Dolly was there with us? Tommy considered this seriously. Would I be on TV? Possibly, Dolly answered. Is that something you'd want? Maybe, but only if Grandma Rose is comfortable with it. She takes care of me, so I want to take care of her too. Margaret's heart swelled with pride at her grandson's thoughtfulness. At 12 years old, he was already learning what it meant to put family first. Okay, Margaret said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. If you think it's the right thing to do, I trust your judgment. But I have one condition. I want the focus to be on kindness, not on our situation. I don't want people to pity us. Absolutely, Dolly agreed. We'll make sure the story is about community and caring, not about need and charity. Deal? Deal. As they shook hands, Dolly smiled. You know, I have a feeling this is going to be the start of something beautiful. Sometimes when we share our stories of kindness, it inspires other people to be kind too. This might end up being bigger than just one grocery store transaction. She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday morning at Peterson's Market, the site of the original encounter. Dolly had suggested conducting it there to emphasize the community aspect of the story and to give David Kowalski's business a positive boost from the media attention. Emma Rodriguez from the Tennessean had been chosen to conduct the interview after Dolly's team reviewed her previous work and noted her reputation for sensitive handling of personal stories. The plan was for a print interview with photos, which would then be made available to other outlets, a way to control the narrative while satisfying the media's appetite for the story. But between Thursday afternoon and Monday morning, something unexpected happened. The story took on a life of its own. It started with small acts of kindness at Peterson's Market. On Friday morning, a customer named James Patterson was $3.42 short on his grocery bill when the person behind him in line, a teacher named Lisa Chen, quietly handed the exact amount to the cashier. Dolly would approve, she said with a smile. By Friday afternoon, the store's employees were noticing an increase in these small gestures. Customers were paying for each other's coffee, leaving extra money for the next person who might be short, and even organizing an impromptu food drive for the local food bank. It's like the kindness is contagious, Sarah Mitchell told David as they watched a customer help an elderly man carry his groceries to his car. People are looking for ways to help each other. Word of these continuing acts of kindness began spreading on social media. Jennifer Walsh, whose original Facebook post had started the media attention, found herself documenting what was being called the Peterson's Market movement. Her follow-up posts about customers helping customers began attracting attention from local news outlets and national social media influencers. The movement wasn't limited to Peterson's Market. Reports began coming in from across Nashville of similar acts of kindness. People paying for strangers' meals, helping with gas money, offering rides to those who needed them. The hashtag #PayItForwardNashville began trending locally. Dr. Amanda Foster, a sociology professor at Vanderbilt University, was interviewed by a local radio station about the phenomenon. What we're seeing, she explained, is something called moral elevation. When people witness acts of kindness, especially highly publicized ones, it can inspire them to act more kindly themselves. The Dolly Parton grocery store incident has become a catalyst for broader community engagement. But the most significant development came on Sunday evening, when Marcus Thompson received a phone call that would change the entire scope of the story. "Mr. Thompson, this is Catherine Williams. I live in Memphis, and I read your article about Dolly Parton and the elderly woman at the grocery store." Marcus settled back in his chair, expecting another reader's comment about the heartwarming nature of the story. Instead, Catherine continued with something that made him grab his notebook. "I wanted you to know that something similar happened here yesterday. I was at Kroger, and my card was declined when I was trying to buy medicine for my diabetic husband. A woman in line behind me, not famous, just a regular person, paid for everything. She said she'd heard about what happened in Nashville and wanted to keep the kindness going. I think this story is inspiring people to help each other." Marcus spent the next 2 hours on the phone with Catherine, getting the details of her story and gathering contact information. Then he reached out to his network of freelance journalists across Tennessee and neighboring states. "I need you to keep your ears open," he told them. "I have a feeling this Nashville grocery store story is creating copycat acts of kindness. If you hear about similar incidents, let me know immediately." By Monday morning, Marcus had confirmed 6 similar stories across 3 states. A young father in Knoxville whose groceries were paid for by a stranger. A college student in Birmingham whose textbooks were purchased by an anonymous donor. An elderly man in Louisville whose prescription was covered by the person behind him in line at the pharmacy. The pattern was consistent. Someone in need, a stranger offering help, and a direct reference to the Nashville story as inspiration. Marcus called Dolly's publicist. "I think we need to expand the scope of Monday's interview," he said. "This isn't just about one act of kindness anymore. It's become a movement." Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn sunlight that made Nashville look like it was posing for a postcard. Peterson's Market had been closed to regular customers for the morning to accommodate the interview, but David had arranged for several regular customers, including Sarah Mitchell, to be present to provide context about the store's role in the community. Margaret arrived 30 minutes early, wearing her best dress and looking nervous but determined. Tommy was beside her, having convinced her to let him stay home from school for what he was now calling the most important day of our lives. Dolly arrived precisely on time, carrying a large bouquet of flowers and a warm smile. She hugged Margaret and Tommy as if they were old friends, immediately putting them at ease. "Before we start," Dolly said to Emma Rodriguez, "I want to make sure Margaret and Tommy are comfortable with everything. This is their story as much as it is mine." Emma had prepared thoughtful questions that focused on the community impact rather than personal hardships. She asked Margaret about her connection to the neighborhood, about Tommy's recovery from his illness, and about how it felt to be part of a story that was inspiring others. "I keep hearing that people are doing kind things because of what happened to us," Margaret said during the interview. "That amazes me more than anything. If our little moment at the grocery store helps other people, then I'm grateful it became public." Tommy, who had initially been shy in front of the cameras, warmed up when Emma asked him about his favorite song. He ended up singing a few lines of Jolene while Dolly accompanied him on guitar, creating a moment that would later be viewed millions of times on social media. But the most powerful part of the interview came when Emma asked Dolly about the broader implications of what had happened. "You know," Dolly said, "I've been famous for a long time, and I've seen how people can sometimes put celebrities on pedestals, like we're somehow different from everyone else. But the truth is, we all have the same capacity for kindness. What happened at Peterson's Market could have been done by anyone. It just happened to be me that day." She looked directly into the camera. "I hope people don't see this story and think, "Oh, that's nice. Dolly Parton helped someone. I hope they see it and think, I could do that too." Because they can. Every single one of them can. Margaret nodded in agreement. That's exactly right. The kindness isn't special because it came from a famous person. It's special because it came from the heart. As the interview wrapped up, Emma had one final question. What would you want people to take away from this story? Margaret and Dolly looked at each other, a moment of understanding passing between them. Margaret spoke first. I'd want them to know that we're all just one difficult moment away from needing help, and we're all just one kind gesture away from being someone's answer to prayer. If this story reminds people of that, then every bit of attention will have been worth it. Dolly added, and I'd want them to remember that kindness doesn't require fame or fortune. It just requires noticing when someone needs help and being willing to provide it. Some of the most beautiful acts of kindness I've ever witnessed have been between ordinary people on ordinary days. The interview concluded with Margaret, Tommy, and Dolly walking through Peterson's Market together, stopping to chat with employees and discussing the store's role as a community gathering place. The final photo showed all three of them standing in aisle 3, where the original encounter had taken place, with Margaret's arm around Tommy and Dolly's hand resting gently on Margaret's shoulder. That evening, as Emma worked on her article, she reflected on what she had witnessed. The story she was writing wasn't just about a celebrity's act of kindness anymore. It had evolved into something larger, a testament to the way individual actions can spark collective change, and how the simple act of caring for one another could create ripples that spread far beyond what anyone might expect. The article would run in the next morning's Tennessean with the headline, "How One Moment of Kindness Sparked a Movement of Compassion." But the real story was still being written, one act of kindness at a time, across communities where people were discovering that they too had the power to change someone's day. Margaret Henderson went to sleep that Monday night as a private citizen who had accidentally become the face of a kindness movement. She woke up Tuesday morning to discover that the movement had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. By Tuesday afternoon, Pay It Forward Nashville had been shared over 50,000 times. Similar hashtags were emerging in cities across the country. A GoFundMe page had been started to support Margaret and Tommy, though Margaret had specifically requested that any donations be directed to local food banks instead. Most surprisingly, Peterson's Market had received calls from grocery stores in 12 states, all wanting to know how to encourage similar acts of kindness among their customers. David Kowalski found himself accidentally becoming an expert on community building through small businesses. "It's incredible," he told a reporter from the New York Times who called Tuesday afternoon. "We didn't do anything different except treat our customers like family. Apparently that's revolutionary in today's world." But the most meaningful development came that Tuesday evening, when Margaret received a handwritten letter from a woman in Oregon who had seen the interview on social media. "Dear Mrs. Henderson," it read, "I wanted you to know that because of your story, I paid for a young mother's groceries today when her card was declined. She cried with gratitude, and so did I. Thank you for reminding me that we can all be the kindness someone else needs. Your story changed my heart." Margaret read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the wooden box where she kept her most treasured keepsakes. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start writing back to every person who took the time to share how the story had touched their lives. She had no way of knowing that she would need a much larger box. 3 months after the Peterson's Market encounter, Margaret Henderson sat in her kitchen on a snowy January morning, surrounded by boxes of letters from across the country. What had started as a simple grocery shopping trip had somehow transformed into a full-time correspondence project, connecting her with hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by acts of kindness inspired by her story. Tommy, now 13 and fully recovered from his autumn illness, had become her unofficial assistant, helping organize the letters by state and type of kindness story. His favorite category was what they called surprise helpers, stories of unexpected people stepping in to help strangers, just as Dolly had done for them. "Grandma Rose, listen to this one," Tommy said, pulling a letter from the Texas pile. A police officer in Dallas was called to a grocery store for a shoplifting complaint, but when he got there, he found out it was just a mom trying to buy diapers for her baby with a card that wouldn't work. Instead of arresting her, he paid for the diapers and a week's worth of groceries. She writes that she told him about our story, and he said that's what gave him the idea to help, instead of just following procedure. Margaret smiled as she addressed another envelope. She'd been writing personal responses to every letter they received, and while it was time-consuming, it had become one of the most meaningful experiences of her life. Each story reminded her that kindness was contagious in the most beautiful way possible. The impact had extended far beyond individual acts of charity. Peterson's Market had seen a 40% increase in business, with customers coming from across Nashville just to shop at the store where it all started. David Kowalski had used the increased revenue to give all his employees raises and had established a small fund to help customers who found themselves short at checkout. "We've had to hire 2 new cashiers," Sarah Mitchell told Margaret during one of her regular visits to the store. "And you know what the best part is? The new employees ask to be trained on how to handle situations where customers need help. They want to be part of continuing what you and Miss Dolly started." Sarah herself had been transformed by the experience. The media attention surrounding the story had led to interviews where she talked about her nursing school dreams, and those interviews had reached the attention of Vanderbilt Medical Center's administration. They had offered her a scholarship and guaranteed clinical placement, recognizing her as exactly the kind of compassionate person they wanted in their nursing program. "I start my clinical rotations next month," Sarah had told Margaret with tears in her eyes. "None of this would have happened if I hadn't been working that day, if I hadn't seen firsthand what real kindness looks like." But perhaps the most significant change was in Margaret herself. The shy, private woman who had once counted every penny and worried about drawing attention to her struggles had discovered a voice and a purpose she never knew she possessed. She had been invited to speak at community events, had been featured in magazine articles about grassroots kindness movements, and had even been asked to consult with non-profit organizations about community outreach. "You know what I think happened?" Margaret said to Tommy as they worked through the morning's mail. "I think I spent so many years focused on just surviving, on just getting by, that I forgot I could be part of something bigger." "You were always part of something bigger," Tommy replied, with the wisdom of a teenager who had learned about loss and love in equal measure. "You were taking care of me. That's pretty big." Margaret reached over and ruffled his hair. "You're absolutely right, but now I get to take care of more people, just in a different way." The phone rang, interrupting their letter-writing session. It was Janet Sullivan, Dolly's assistant, with an invitation that would once again change the trajectory of Margaret's life. "Margaret, Miss Dolly is being honored at the Country Music Association Awards next month for her philanthropic work, and she specifically requested that you and Tommy be her guests. She wants you to be part of her acceptance speech." Margaret's hand went to her throat. "Oh my goodness. I don't know if I'm ready for something that public." "She thought you might feel that way," Janet said gently. "She wanted me to tell you that it's not about the fame or the glamour. It's about showing the world what real community looks like. She says you've taught her as much about kindness as she's taught anyone else." After hanging up, Margaret sat quietly for a long moment. Tommy looked up from his letter sorting, recognizing the expression on her face that meant she was working through something important. "What do you think, Tommy? Should we go to the awards show?" Tommy grinned. "Are you kidding? Of course we should go. Besides, I think you've got something important to say, and people need to hear it." That evening, Margaret called Dolly directly to accept the invitation. Their conversation, which lasted over an hour, covered everything from Margaret's ongoing correspondence project to Tommy's plans for high school, to Dolly's own reflections on how the grocery store encounter had affected her. "You know, Margaret," Dolly said near the end of their call, "I've been performing for audiences my whole life, but I've never felt as proud of anything as I am of what that moment in Peterson's Market became. Not because it made me look good, but because it showed that ordinary people can create extraordinary change." "I don't feel ordinary anymore," Margaret admitted. "Not in a famous way, but in a purposeful way. Like I understand now that every interaction we have is a chance to make someone's day a little better." "That's exactly right, and that's exactly what I want to tell people at the awards show." The CMA awards ceremony took place on a warm November evening at the Bridgestone Arena. Margaret, wearing an elegant dress that Dolly's stylist had helped her choose, sat in the front row with Tommy, who looked handsome and grown up in his first formal suit. The arena was filled with country music's biggest stars, but Margaret found herself surprisingly calm. When Dolly was introduced for her humanitarian award, the standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. She looked radiant in a shimmering gown, Her hair perfectly styled, every inch the superstar the world expected to see. But when she spoke, her words were as down-to-earth as they had been in that grocery store checkout line. "Thank you so much for this honor," Dolly began, her voice carrying easily through the arena. "But I have to tell you, the most important award I've received this year didn't come from an organization or a ceremony. It came from learning what real generosity looks like from a woman who has very little but gives everything she has." The camera found Margaret in the audience as Dolly continued. 9 months ago, I met Margaret Henderson and her grandson Tommy at a grocery store here in Nashville. I paid for their groceries when Margaret's card was declined. It took me about 30 seconds and cost me less than $12. I thought that was the end of the story. Dolly paused, her eyes finding Margaret's in the crowd. But Margaret taught me that kindness isn't measured by what we give. It's measured by what it inspires. That $12 transaction has led to countless acts of kindness across the country. Margaret has personally written over 800 letters to people sharing their own stories of helping others. She's spoken at community events. She's helped organize food drives. And she's shown everyone who meets her that the most powerful force in the world isn't fame or fortune. It's caring about each other. The audience erupted in applause, and Margaret felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Beside her, Tommy reached over and took her hand. "Margaret Henderson," Dolly continued, "would you please stand up? I want everyone to see the real hero in this story." As Margaret rose to her feet, the entire arena burst into a standing ovation. Through her tears, she could see thousands of people applauding not her fame or her talent, but her heart. For a woman who had spent most of her life invisible to the world, it was a moment of recognition that felt both overwhelming and deeply healing. But Dolly wasn't finished. "Margaret, I have something I want to give you. Not because you need it, but because you've earned it, and because I know you'll use it to keep making the world better." Dolly announced that she was establishing the Margaret Henderson Community Kindness Fund, with an initial donation of $100,000 to support grassroots acts of kindness and community building across the country. The fund would be administered jointly by Dolly Parton Enterprises and a non-profit organization, with Margaret serving as its first director. "You've shown us that kindness isn't a one-time event," Dolly said in conclusion. "It's a way of life. Thank you for reminding all of us that we don't have to be famous to make a difference. We just have to care." As the ceremony continued around them, Margaret sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. She was no longer just the grandmother who had been helped by a famous singer. She was now officially in charge of spreading kindness on a national scale. Tommy leaned over and whispered, "Grandma Rose, I think this is just the beginning." He was right. 6 months later, the Margaret Henderson Community Kindness Fund had distributed grants to 127 community projects across 34 states. Margaret, now officially employed as the fund's director, split her time between reviewing grant applications, speaking at community events, and maintaining her extensive correspondence with people who continued to share their kindness stories. Tommy, now in 8th grade, had started a kindness club at his school and was already planning to study social work in college. "I want to help people the way Grandma Rose helps people," he told anyone who asked about his future plans. Peterson's Market had become something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in community building, with David Kowalski offering tours and workshops on creating inclusive, supportive business environments. Sarah Mitchell had graduated from nursing school and was working in the pediatric ward at Vanderbilt, where she was known for her exceptional compassion with patients and families. And every Tuesday afternoon, Margaret still shopped at Peterson's Market, still walking the same route from her apartment, still carefully considering each purchase. The difference was that now she was recognized and hugged by fellow customers, thanked by employees, and often stopped by visitors who wanted to meet the woman who had helped prove that kindness was contagious. On a particular Tuesday in late spring, exactly 1 year after the original encounter, Margaret was selecting vegetables when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I think you dropped this." She turned to see Dolly Parton holding out a folded piece of paper, a mischievous smile on her face. "I don't think I dropped anything," Margaret said, playing along. "Are you sure? It looks like a list of all the ways one person can change the world." Margaret laughed and accepted the paper, which turned out to be a card congratulating her on the first anniversary of the day that changed everything. "You know," Dolly said as they walked through the store together, drawing stares and smiles from other customers, I've been thinking about that day a lot lately. I keep coming back to something you said, that we're all just one difficult moment away from needing help, and one kind gesture away from being someone's answer to prayer. I remember saying that. Well, I think you were wrong about something. Margaret looked at her with surprise. What's that? I don't think it's just one kind gesture. I think it's every kind gesture. Every day we get up, every person we encounter, every moment we have a choice between helping or looking away. They're all opportunities to be someone's answer to prayer. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. I guess the question is whether we're paying attention to those opportunities. As they reached the checkout, the same aisle 3 where it all began, Sarah Mitchell looked up from her register with a huge smile. She'd requested to work Tuesday afternoons specifically for moments like this, when her 2 favorite customers shopped together. How are my favorite ladies today? Sarah asked as she began scanning their items. We're perfect, Margaret replied, looking around at the familiar store where her life had changed so completely. Just perfect. As they walked out of Peterson's Market together, Margaret reflected on how much her life had transformed. She'd gone from struggling to pay for groceries to directing a national kindness fund. She'd gone from avoiding public attention to speaking regularly about the power of community. She'd gone from feeling invisible to feeling like she had something important to contribute to the world. But the most significant change, she realized, wasn't in her circumstances. It was in her understanding of what it meant to be connected to other people. The grocery store encounter had taught her that kindness wasn't just about helping others. It was about recognizing that we're all part of the same human family, all deserving of dignity and care. Dolly, she said as they paused outside the store, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been shopping that day? If someone else had been behind me in line? Dolly considered this seriously. You know, I used to think about that. But now, I think the question isn't what would have happened if I hadn't been there. The question is, how many other opportunities for kindness I might have missed because I wasn't paying attention? That's a good point. Besides, Dolly added with a grin, I have a feeling that even if I hadn't been there that day, someone else would have stepped up eventually. The kindness was already in the community. It just needed someone to start the chain reaction. As they parted ways, Margaret heading home to Tommy and her afternoon letters, and Dolly heading to her next appointment, both women carried with them the satisfaction of knowing that their chance encounter had created something beautiful and lasting. The Peterson's Market receipt from that first day still hung on Margaret's refrigerator, faded now but clearly visible, $11.57 for soup ingredients and medicine. $11.57 that had somehow grown into a movement touching thousands of lives across the country. Every time Margaret looked at it, she was reminded that we never know which small act of kindness might be the one that changes everything. And that understanding had become the foundation of everything she did, every letter she wrote, every speech she gave, and every grant she approved through the Community Kindness Fund. The story that had begun with a declined debit card in aisle 3 of a Nashville grocery store had become something neither Margaret nor Dolly could have imagined, proof that ordinary people, on ordinary days, have the extraordinary power to transform the world around them, one act of kindness at a time.